back in the day in college, which is a lot of what we try to focus on here, we had some seriously mean games of euchre. Mostly partners, and we play little tournaments in the house. You and I would even play bid poker, but anything with poker, or sorry, not poker, bid euchre. Right. Anything with euchre, I was all in on. And I think I actually learned the game at the house and wasn't very good when we started, and took it damn seriously because I wanted to be good at something. So I dedicated all my studying time to getting better at euchre.
This is Third Song In with Chris Derrickson and Tom Polachek.
And I got better and was pretty decent. And there's a couple guys in the house, imagine this, talked trash. So I'd hate to lose to them. So I try even harder. And by the time, I guess it was like my junior year, I was pretty decent. And so pause there. I think I'd started to tell a story about this class where I never went to class, heard the midterm was happening, went to the midterm, took the test,
yes,
left. Someone told me that they were giving midterms back that day, so I went to class that day. Teacher walked over and put the test face down on my desk and was like, can't imagine what you would do if you ever showed up to class. So I turned it over and I got a 97. I got the highest grade in the class. So that class had a take-home final, and I hadn't done any more work up to that point. So I found a group of friends to do the final with, which was fair game. Knocked it out multiple hours. I was really feeling good about what we did. Done. Walking back to campus from the dorms back towards the building where it was due at 5 o'clock. Somebody from the house came up and was like, dude, we're playing euchre, you want to play? And I'm like, yeah. So I took off and I'm like, I can drop it off later. Go back and played euchre all the rest of the night and never turned in my final. So I'm not proud of that story. I would be if I was a professional euchre player, but I'm not.
That's right. That's right. If you made your fortune playing euchre, maybe partners euchre.
So I had the passing paper in my hand and walked back to the house and played euchre. And what's funny is I remember that story, but I don't remember if I won at euchre or what. So what the hell was I thinking? Which is what many of you are asking at the time anyway.
It was so rare to come into the house at any point of the day or night and not see four guys sitting around a table playing cards.
Yep.
And it was always euchre. Like, I don't think anybody played any, other games. Nobody played poker back then to speak of, and nobody played, I don't remember people playing spades or anything else, but occasionally spades, I guess, but it always seemed to be euchre. And it got to the point where, there was a solid group that played and they knew the game so well, and they knew their partners so well that it would just, people shuffle, deal, and then there would be a flurry of cards that would go down. Like a hand would occur in like 5 seconds. It would all be done. And everybody would, then you'd start talking shit to each other because somebody won and somebody lost, or somebody got a point or went alone. But it happened so fast that if you weren't paying close attention, you'd have no idea, because it was just like, it looked like everybody just tossed their cards on the table at the same time.
Yeah, people would get all mad at me when I'd play like more casually afterwards. Like, and I throw in my cards, like, what are you doing? I'm like, this is what's going to happen. They're like, yeah, but play it out.
Yeah, I know. I've had that same problem. There was a little bit of time when, before my kids were born, that we had a little traveling euchre game going on with some guys I work with and spouses and what have you. But it wasn't nearly as competitive, and there was still some shit talking, but not as much as I remember from the house. But that's our theme for this episode. We're going to talk about games, and as opposed to sports, we want to talk about games, things like card games, things like drinking games to some extent. Growing up, well, not growing up, but being in a fraternity house filled with 18 to 22-year-old young men, there's nothing but testosterone everywhere flying around, and everything was competitive. Like everything. everybody was trying so hard to just beat the hell out of everybody else. And it didn't matter whether, we picked up tennis rackets and played in the tennis court, which was literally in front of our house, or playing pickup basketball, or playing things like cards or quarters or anything else. Everybody was always so competitive. And you and I were no different, and maybe even worse than some, I think.
Yeah, I got a major competitive streak. I remember playing tennis too. That's another one that I'm terrible at tennis, but it seemed like we were playing, the finals of Wimbledon sometimes. We're just like racing around the court like it mattered. And I would get so pissed off when I would lose. And
I know.
yeah, but it's all right. I didn't lose much at euchre. I may have lost in my finals, but I didn't lose at euchre.
That's right. You won that game, probably. You probably won at least a few hands that night. So yeah, I'm sure it all evened out in the end. Well, I can remember that when you and I were living together in the corner double, which would have made it, I believe, our junior year, on a Friday or Saturday night before we would go, to wherever a party might be, or downstairs to the party that was at our own fraternity house, we would play war for beer. And we would blast music, and we would literally bring a keg of beer, or not a keg, I'm sorry, a pitcher of beer up. And I think the rule was that you lost every time you lost a war.
Yeah.
And we would do that for 2 hours. We would start at like 8 o'clock and do that until 10 in the evening, and just drinking and playing cards and getting really pissed that we were winning or losing, like there's any skill whatsoever to that game. and then we'd finish like 3 pitchers of beer probably in that period of time. And then we would go out and see what was going on the row.
Yeah, it's amazing we got into trouble sometimes.
Yeah, I can't imagine the almost fights and the everything else we did so stupidly. But yeah, we played tons of cards. Just like any college campus back there were all kinds of drinking games. People played quarters, and we really seemed to play quarters for keeps when we played. I can also remember there were a bunch of different drinking games that I learned, and I didn't know any drinking games until I got to college. And then I learned about a game called Fuzzy Duck. And then I learned about a game called Whale's Tales. And they were all games where you kind of went in order clockwise around the circle. And there was most of them were like memory games or signal games that you had to follow. And at some point, we ended up combining like 3 or 4 different drinking games all into one drinking game. And we would sit down and play it, and people would, there'd be 8-10 people around a table. And, this would be at our own party, of course, because we weren't very good hosts or anything. So you get like 10 guys around a table, and people who were coming to the party or coming down to get beer in the basement where we were playing, they would stand and watch and try to figure out what the rules were. And it was practically impossible for anyone who hadn't played it to do it. But we did it for, like every weekend. For years, we did that stuff. And we called it Fuzzy Whales, I think was what it was called. That one was. It was a combination of 2 or 3 different games.
Yeah, we had Whale's Tales and Fuzzy Duck, and I think we called it Fuzzy Whales when we combined. But I remember, so the lasting impact of this stuff was crazy because there'd be penalties. So if someone, I forget whatever the rule was, where you got to a point where you could name a rule. But the most common rule was that you couldn't drink with your right hand. So if you got caught drinking with your right hand, you'd have to do a shot or whatever the penalty was. And to this day, I drink a beer, particularly with my left hand.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know that I thought about it. It just became habit because people would grill you so bad if you got caught breaking one of the rules.
Oh yeah, I can remember a lot of pointing, screaming, laughing.
Yeah.
Those were we broke a lot of rules when we were in college, but we tended to enforce the drinking game rules very, very strictly.
Very strict.
But it's, again, it was one of those things where you had all these, guys, and everybody was so competitive. And most of the guys in our fraternity did play organized sports on campus. We're either a lot of football players, quite a few baseball players, a couple soccer players, but everybody was just so competitive about everything. When I think you brought up the idea of having games like this as a theme or as a topic for the episode, the first thing that I thought of was, there's a movie, and I don't know if you've seen this movie. Have you ever seen the movie called Everybody Wants Some?
I don't think so. If I did, I've only seen parts of it like on TV or something.
It is it's by Richard Linklater. He's done a bunch. He did Boyhood. He's directed a lot of really well-known movies, but the first one I ever remember seeing was Dazed and Confused, which came out in
Mhm.
1993. And this movie, Everybody Wants Some, is kind of a it's kind of a sequel. So Dazed and Confused was set in high school in like I think it was class of 83. Like it was literally just a year ahead of us, or maybe 2 years ahead of where we graduated high school. Well, Dazed and Confused is about a freshman going into college in Texas, like 84 or 85. And the lead character, the main guy, is a baseball player. So the movie's really about, these jocks at a Texas school playing, what probably is Division I baseball. Seems like they were all very, aspiring to maybe make it to the major leagues or something. But there's a great scene because these guys were so competitive with each other. There's a scene where the new guy, the freshman, is playing the senior stud, the guy who's like the all-star, all-American college player, and they're playing ping pong. And the new guy beats the senior captain of the baseball team, and he throws his fucking paddle across the table. The freshman ducks, and it like sticks in the wall behind him. He threw it so hard. And he was so pissed off, slammed his hands down on the ping pong table and stormed out of there. And everybody else kind of looked at each other and were like, yeah, that's Jimmy. And that's the first thing I thought of, because that's the way we would react to losing these silly little games, like playing ping pong or playing tennis out in the courts in front of the house or whatever it was.
Well, and I would say that that's a good sign. Sorry to sidetrack us into Bengals Steelers territory, but before the Bengals drafted Burrow, I was listening to podcasts and all the stories about him just being super competitive. And the great ones, and I'm not saying he's great yet, he hasn't played, nor has he stayed healthy, but I mean, the great ones have that
Right.
crazy competitiveness that no one else has. And they talked about ping pong, like when he was at LSU, they played ping pong all the time. And so if you bring up that story, it
Oh,
reminded
that's
me of
funny. Yeah.
it. And I guess he lost one, he was the best at it. He won all the time. And I guess there was a night where he lost a game to one of the other players, and he literally stayed up the rest of the night playing and just playing and playing and playing. Reporter asked him about it, in front of a bunch of people, and he answered it politely. And then later he went over to the reporter and said something like, if he ever do that to me again, he was just like,
Well, that was Jordan, right? That was the thing about Jordan, is it didn't
yeah,
matter whether it was poker or it was dominoes or whatever they did. He was always really competitive, and they say Kobe Bryant was the same way. And there's no question that's part of what motivates people to be like the best ever. Although it also tends to alienate a lot of people and lose a lot of friends, I think. So I
yeah, that's
think we
why,
were fairly good at walking that line mostly.
yeah, I was paving the way to greatness when I skipped that turning in that final and went to go play another game of euchre.
Right. Almost made that pro tour.
So my favorite, though, of the places, you and I and Jope particularly lived together in a couple places. We lived on a street called Syracuse in downtown St. Louis, just off of Del Mar.
Yeah, U
That
City actually, but yeah,
U
yeah,
City, yeah, U
right.
City, right? And that's where we had the car set on fire behind us, which
Mhm.
was really exciting. But that's where some serious Tetris went on, from what I recall. And I was never as good as you all. I don't know if I don't know what I missed, but Tetris was all the rage then. And
Well, at least it was in our apartment, right? I mean,
yeah,
we were all too old to really be kind of like hardcore video gamers. I think if we had been in college 5 or 10 years later, that's what would have consumed us, maybe even more than things like euchre or ping pong or whatever. But it was still like we had an NES system. Joe brought one from home, I guess, or got it for Christmas. And we had a setup in our little family room in that apartment we had, where it was an entertainment center. And on the top of the entertainment center was a relatively large screen TV. I mean, large, like 24 inches or maybe 30 inches. And then there was a little cabinet with a door below it, which I think is where you would normally put like your entertainment system, like your stereo or whatever. And we stuck a tiny little color TV that couldn't have been more than like a 12 or 15 inch screen and we stuck it in there, and we had the NES next to it, the Nintendo, and somebody bought Tetris. And I can remember, so we lived in that apartment. I want to say we lived there for 2 years together,
Yeah, it was 2 years.
probably 2 years. And I would say that 5 to 6 nights a week, the three of us would end up watching TV, and we'd have some show up on the screen. Odds are pretty good. It was probably Cheers or Wings. But at the same time, so two guys would be sitting on the couch, and then one guy would be laying on the floor with a pillow in front of the small TV. We'd open the cabinet, and he would play Tetris until he lost. And for those of you who don't know, everybody probably does, but Tetris is that geometric game where you can use the controls to turn the figures in clockwise or counterclockwise, and you try to fit them into spaces at the bottom of the screen. And if you get a line all the way across, it would disappear. So you get points the more you can do it, and it just keeps coming faster and faster. And we would play that, and if you lost, you had to get up, and whoever was on the couch next would get down on the floor, and they would play. And we would rotate that way, like 4 or 5 nights a week, easy. And and of course, we had a sheet of paper up on the cabinet door, on the inside of the cabinet door, and it showed the record, who had done it, who had won, high score, quickest, whatever it was. And we would, if somebody set the score, it was like we had just won the Super Bowl, man. You'd jump up and down, you'd rub it in somebody's face, and then you move, and the next guy would get in there and just try to get the record. And that's all we did. Like every night we did that.
Well, and we transitioned that very same approach to another lasting memory, which was Pop-A-Shot.
Yes.
I don't remember who, I assume that was Joe Pays.
Actually, it was. You're right. Joe always had the best games.
And I think it was a side-by-side, or was it a single round?
I think that one was single.
Okay.
Yes, I believe it was. Because then later on down the line, I think I had a double somewhere or something like that.
Okay.
I do want to say it was single.
Okay. So, and it wasn't as difficult as the ones you'll see at bars or video game places, but it was fun. And we got super good at it.
Yes.
Because mainly it was bank shots. So we didn't have to call the banks, but everything was a bank, because it would bank and then come back to you faster, which was the idea.
It created a spin or something so that it was the quickest way to get the ball returned to you.
Right. And it was the same thing. And you'd keep your record. Well, early on, records get broken constantly. And I don't remember what the number was. You might have it written down somewhere, but we went at it like crazy. And I remember from that, the training that we got there. So at Schmeezing's, they had a Pop-A-Shot, a real one. And the balls in there were fairly deflated, which gave us the same experience that we had at home, because the balls weren't all as bouncy as they are at the other places. And you and I just crushed it. People would just come and watch us play. Because
I swear to God, there were people who would they'd order beer and then they'd come over, and it was usually one of us was working and the other one would come, and because you could drink for free basically, and we would just pour quarters into the Pop-A-Shot, and then if I got a high score and you were working, I'd go in and relieve you so you could try to get the high score. But you're right, people literally would just sit at tables and watch us because we were so good at it. Yep. And by the way, that maintains. That's like riding a bike, because if I see a Pop-A-Shot and I go to play, it takes me about 3 shots, and then I get into a rhythm and I just destroy people in that game. It's been a while. It's been a couple of years since I found one, but I still it comes back like it was yesterday.
Yeah, not quite as much. I mean, when the balls are really bouncy, it's a little bit harder, but I'm decent at it. But yeah, we were godlike when we were playing that game.
Well,
so it's important.
You remember that the apartment in Richmond Heights was big.
Yeah.
And we had a full dining room in between the kitchen and what was the family room, where we had the TV and stuff. And we didn't have anything in the dining room except for the Pop-A-Shot. And so not only would we play and try to set high scores, we got so good at it that we had a right-handed score, we had a left-handed score, we'd alternate scores, and we had them all. Again, there's a sheet of paper up listing everybody's, who had the high score so far. But we would play horse. We were inventing shots from other rooms, and but again, it was just because we were always competing with each other, and it probably probably having Tetris and having Papa-Shot probably kept us from fisticuffs a few times, because we would just get all the competitiveness out in all of those games we played.
Yeah, and I didn't finish my joke because I wasn't sure where I was going, but we were godlike in Papa-Shot. So the important
Yeah.
stuff in life.
Yeah, I mean, maybe euchre, but probably more Papa-Shot, and for a little while Tetris, I think.
Yeah. Alrighty, that is our primary intro with the themes. Takes us to our question of the episode. It's Jonathan from Knock'em-Stiff, Ohio, which might be my favorite town name that we've had Jonathan write in from yet. The town legend goes that they got the name from all the fights and brawls that broke out. But another theory is that it came from moonshine, which will knock you stiff. But I think they sort of tie together and fit nicely with this episode. As you said, there probably would have been many more fights if we didn't have some outlet for relieving our competitiveness. So, Jonathan would like to know, what is our favorite non-sport game? Do you want to start us off?
Yeah, sure. I spent a lot of time I again love Papa-Shot. That's probably the one, particularly because I continue. It comes back so quickly, and I feel like I can win a lot of games with that. But I would say my favorite non-sports, not organized, not playing pickup basketball or whatever else it may be, would be throwing darts. At least historically, and I kind of almost guess that we might have the same answer, only because we used to have so much fun back then when we were living together, the three of us, and more, the two of us, you and I. Joe didn't always go with us, but we would throw darts, at least one night a week. We were very close to a bar called Blueberry Hill, which actually had a dart room, and they had competitions. I never anyway entered into any of those competitions, but we threw darts pretty seriously. We all had our own set of darts, and we'd buy a couple pitchers of beer, and it was a great night of entertainment. Because you get typically, at least during the week, if you tried to do it on Friday or Saturday, it was tougher. But if you got there on a Tuesday or Wednesday night relatively early, you could have a dartboard for the whole night and just drink and throw darts. And it's a very social thing. I mean, I'm sure the way a lot of people look at bowling, or now it's bags, you see guys doing it. It's just, you can drink without, affecting your ability to play at least too much, at least until the end of the night, like we've talked about with the beer curve. But I really enjoyed throwing darts. And every once in a while, someone, nowadays will say, hey, there'll be a dartboard and say, hey, do you guys want to play? And I'll jump right up. And I just always really enjoyed that game, even though I wasn't particularly good. I was okay, but I got better the more we played, and I really enjoyed it.
Well, don't forget, you got better after like beer 2 or 3, and then boom, went down.
Right,
so,
right. You had to walk that line very carefully. If you ate something at the same time, then it might extend the curve for a little bit.
It is, and I think in the end, I would choose the same thing, darts. Same thing. I'm decent. When I get hot, I can, play at a pretty decent level. So I do have a funny story that what I did think about, you call it bags or cornhole, whatever you want to call it. So the neighborhood I live in North Carolina, once a year, there's a cornhole tournament, and it's not taken very seriously. It'll be, kids and parents and other stuff. But so we won our first 2 games, feeling pretty damn good about myself. And I'm okay. I'm not bad about it. Then we played these 2 guys who just looked like, I don't know, I won't make fun, but they did not look athletic at all.
Right.
But they were damn good at cornhole. And I guess you played at 21. I think they beat us 21-0.
Oh my God.
And it wasn't even bad. But my favorite part was he's throwing and I throw, and he goes, do you guys practice much? I'm like, no, not at all. He's like, yeah, I can tell. And I was like,
you son of a bitch.
You asshole.
Yeah, really. You don't have to say that.
Right.
Really, although pretty good shit talk, I got to say.
It is. They go from tournament to tournament, right, and play, and this was easy money for them. It wasn't a lot of money, but they won. But yeah, I enjoy that, but I still go back to darts because I think I have some level of skill. And I did find, I don't know if I said this, I had given Eli, my son, who's at NC State, 2 sets of darts. He had a dartboard in his apartment, and I brought over 2 sets of darts for him. And I sort of forgot about him. Went over. He's like, "Hey, you want to play darts?" So he took out one of the dart sets, and it had Blueberry Hill Flights.
Is that right?
Yeah, it was cool. I'll send you a pic. But
Yeah, that's really cool.
and they're still in great shape. I mean, because I hadn't used them a whole lot, which just shows how little we played
Yeah.
after leaving. But yeah, I was like really excited to see them, and I'm sure he had no idea. He's like, "Oh, there's Dad getting excited about something stupid again."
That's some
So-
weird shit. Yeah, a couple birthdays ago, actually, I got a set of darts. My wife gave me a set of darts just kind of out of the blue. And not because I had been playing much, but I had lost, I think the last time before that I had played darts, a few years back, I I think I got drunk and I just left them anywhere. I left them where they were. And the next day I was like, where'd my darts go? And then I didn't think about it again for probably 2 years because I didn't play. But the next time I wanted them, I couldn't find them at all. So I have a brand new set of darts that I've yet to throw anywhere. So I probably need to find a place soon and
Well,
just go.
I'll borrow my Blueberry Hill darts back, and we'll throw some darts, buddy.
That's very cool, man.
All right, that's going to take us to our recommendations. So, a quick reminder for those who have listened and for those who haven't, we make recommendations from then, which is anything prior to 2000. Largely, we try to find something in our college years or right thereafter. And then after that, we will do now. So, anything post 2000 in cultural forms. So, movies, TV, songs, books, whatever. Tom's definitely our movie aficionado, and I'm lazy and can't focus for 2 hours, so I usually choose 4 or 5 minute songs. So not this time. I picked a movie, damn it.
I was going to say, what movie did you pick for back then?
Well, I thought I would have picked the oldest movie, but apparently not. I really had no choice. Steve McQueen is one of my favorite actors of all time, and I grew up in Cincinnati. So the 1965 movie, The Cincinnati Kid, directed by Norman Jewison, starring Steve McQueen, Edward G. Robinson, who's a really famous, often played mob type characters. Carl Malden, who you and I probably knew a little bit more from one of his detective shows, which I should remember, but
yeah, Streets of San Francisco, right? Was that him?
I think so. Yeah.
Maybe.
If not, we'll do it on Post Facto. And Margaret, Tuesday Weld, and one of my favorite bit actors, Rip Torn, who was in the greatest movie of all time, Dodgeball.
I'm glad you said Dodgeball. I wasn't sure what you were going to say there. I love that movie. I love him in that movie.
It is. If you can dodge a wrench,
You dodge a wrench.
Dodge a ball. But that wasn't his character in this movie. So this is all about card playing. Often, I think, seen as a poor man's version of the movie that's more famous than this. Oh, it just went right out of my head.
Godfather.
Good try.
Rocky.
No, the classic. Nice try. I should have written it down, motherfucker. It's not The Great Gatsby. It's a movie like
Big
that.
Chill.
It's The Sting. The Sting.
The Sting.
With Robert
That is a great
Redford
movie.
and Paul Newman. My God, work on your editing skills, Tom. If that stays in there,
Yeah, it's
show
staying.
just
my
how
friend.
dumb I am. All right, it's often seen as a poor man's version of The Sting, but it definitely stands on its own. So Steve McQueen is the character, the kid. He wants to be the greatest poker player or card player in the world. Edward G. Robinson plays the big dog, the one who's seen as the best in the business. And I didn't write down the name of the character. It might have been Rip Torn, actually. I'm sorry if I get that wrong. There's Edward G. Robinson's character came to town where the kid was, and he went and played a big game against another gambler and ended up the big gambler won. The guy that lost went and recruited a dealer and tried to get him to cheat so that the kid would be able to beat Edward G. Robinson's character. And the dealer was actually Carl Malden. He was a straight shooter. He didn't want to cheat. Long story short, the guy called in all his debt and made him cheat because otherwise he wouldn't be able to afford it.
Mm.
So they finally have the big showdown. It's 5 or 6 players, and as you would expect in a game like this, all the non-primary actors, fall off. Comes down to McQueen's character and Edward G. Robinson's character. McQueen is beating him all the way up until the very last hand, and shockingly, McQueen ends up losing. Walks off into the sunset, sees his girlfriend, and walks off with her. So there's an alternate ending there, but I haven't seen the movie in a really long time, which is why I decided not to name all the characters because I was probably going to mess that up. But it's a great card playing movie. I think it's worth going back and seeing. I'm going to try to see if I can watch it again this weekend. I love McQueen. He's just great. And this is one of his earlier movies, and he's as good as ever. So I think it's well worth a watch. I will remember to give it a rating on egg burritos with sour cream. I would easily give it a 4. I would give it a 5 if I'd seen it in the last couple of decades, but I haven't. I just remember always having an affection for it. I think mainly because I, grew up in Cincinnati and was attached to anything. But it's some really good acting, some really, really great actors. And at one point, Sam Peckinpah, I think is his name, was going to direct it, and Norman Jewison took over, and he said this is the movie that opened things up for him. He was able to do more serious movies because before this, I think he just did, TV comedies and stuff. So,
Yeah, I've never seen that movie. I've heard of it, and I knew it was a Steve McQueen movie. It must have been one of his first movies, right? I mean, he didn't do that many, but I would like to watch that. I think that would be worthwhile.
I would agree, and it's got Cincinnati in it too.
There you go. There you go. So I have this weird convoluted recommendation. What happened was I ended up going into a Walter Tevis rabbit hole. The movie that I wanted to recommend a movie, and the movie I wanted to recommend is called The Color of Money. Color of Money came out in 1986 and was directed by Martin Scorsese. I think it was fairly acclaimed when it came out. It has Paul Newman, another of those actors from the 60s and 70s that were so good, and Tom Cruise, a really young Tom Cruise. The Color of Money is actually a sequel, though, and it's a sequel to a movie called The Hustler, so both of those movies were originally novels written by Walter Tevis. So Walter Tevis wrote The Hustler in 1959, and I have read that book. And that's what I was going to recommend, because if I were going to give that book, Egg Burritos with Sour Cream, I would probably give it 4. It's outstanding. It's such a great novel. And it's about a kid who's really good at pool, who gets taken under somebody's wing, and he's basically learning how to hustle people in different places. And he travels around the Midwest, and there's a girl, and it's got a kind of a noir feel to it, but the novel's excellent. It's really good. And I read it not very recently. I read it, I think, in 2023. I'd never read it before, but I read it because Walter Tevis is also the writer who wrote The Queen's Gambit, which was turned into a TV show that was highly acclaimed about 1.5 years ago, that was about chess. So I was like, this guy, Walter Tevis, he's just covering games, man. I got to recommend this guy. So I love the book. Movie Color of Money I rewatched about 1 year or so ago, and I liked it okay the first time I saw it, but when I rewatched it, I loved it. And Paul Newman was so good in it. And he plays the same character in both. But what's weird is The Color of Money, also a Walter Tevis novel, but that was published in 1984. So, there's a huge gap. There's a 25-year gap between the first book and the second book. And there's the original Hustler movie came out, I think, in the early 60s, also with Paul Newman. And then the sequel, what did I just say? Like 25 years later, still Paul Newman playing the same character, but 25 years older. So he's the young hotshot pool player in the first book and movie. And then he's a guy, by the time The Color of Money comes around, he doesn't play anymore. He sells booze. He's kind of a borderline alcoholic. He's got a girlfriend who, owns or manages a bar that he sees all the time. But he runs across Tom Cruise, who is this unbelievable talent, but a complete airhead and just a maniac, just wild man, and completely uncontrollable. And Newman decides to stake Tom Cruise and become that guy, the handler that takes him around to different places and hustles people for money. And the big finale of The Color of Money is a straight tournament, pool tournament. And Paul Newman's character and Tom Cruise's character, they split up at a certain point because Tom Cruise doesn't want to have somebody controlling him anymore because he's just all angry. He's just an angry young man. And Newman decides to play in that tournament, as does Tom Cruise. And I won't give away the ending, but there's an ending at the tournament and then there's an ending to the movie, and they're not the same ending. But what was really cool about it is Paul Newman kind of walks into the sunset, so to speak, but he's got this new love of, or I guess rekindling of an old love of playing pool, and he's decided he's going to go back and play like tournament pool and do all that. So it all rotates and revolves around pool, which is not a game I was ever good at all, and don't really know that much about. Like I don't watch pool on TV or anything like that, but the combination of Paul Newman and Tom Cruise in The Color of Money is absolutely worth watching, and I highly recommend the movie. I recommend, kind of, I guess, as an honorable mention, the novel The Hustler. I still haven't read the novel The Color of Money, but Tevis is a great writer, so it's probably worth reading that as well.
Nice recommendation.
A little confusing, but in terms of the time frame and exactly what I wanted to recommend. But just look up Walter Tevis. Seems like that's the way to go.
It's not nearly as confusing as by trying to remember the name of the Sting. So I'm pulling a Tom with my now recommendation. So maybe I'll go first.
Sure.
You can't tell it by looking at the episode outline, but I have a alternative. I have a secondary choice, which you do all the time.
Yes.
So it's sort of
I definitely cheat with recommendations. There's no question.
You do. So, and I'm sort of breaking our rules, which we'll talk about in a second, but I don't care because I went back and looked at old episode outlines just to prep and make sure that I hadn't done this band before. And I had, and I'm repeating band, but I know. And it's not Rodney Crowell. So, so my secondary choice, the one that I actually wrote down on the episode list, was a song called Fall Out of Love by Turnpike Troubadours. The Troubadours are from Oklahoma. They have some really fun, upbeat stuff. This is not one of them. This is about as downbeat of a song as you can find. And it references losing in love to losing at cards, which is where I originally was going to go with this. And the line is, well, you bet your heart on a diamond, and I played the clubs and spades. We gambled and lost. Guess we both paid the cost. So that's the reference to card playing. But that's not my choice. I went with one of my go-to bands, Richmond Fontaine. And the reason I did is because Tom, I recommended Two Lonely Hearts, I think the song was, in one of our previous episodes. And yes. Tom, you had mentioned in your feedback that you've tried really hard to get into him. He has the raspy voice and all the other stuff. He's got great songwriting. His songs kind of drone. So it's never quite stuck with you. Well, this isn't a playlist, so I think I can sort of cheat the system. I'm going to go with Richmond Fontaine's Casino Lights, which is from 2004, I believe. The album is The Fitzgerald, which is a really slow, depressing album. I think he wrote a book based on one of the songs called The Janitor, which is a great book, but also depressing. Verse in the song is casino, 6 nights a week, drinking whiskey and cokes and gambling. Only home on nights when his stomach would burn, he'd lay in the dark, drink peppermint schnapps and wait it out. So in order to cure his alcohol, he drank more alcohol. So he meets his sister, talk about it. She looks like she's been up for days. She's a wreck. She's like, I'm leaving town. I got to get out of here. Put some money down in front of him. He takes it and she takes off. And He walks outside to see where she went, and he starts to walk towards home, and he turns around, and these are the closing lines. He walked down the street as the sun began to rise, and he saw the kid following, dragging a suitcase by a piece of rope. So she left her kid behind, left him money. So he's now gonna be taking care of his struggling in many ways sister's kid. So the really dark and downside of gambling and
How
all
did you
that goes
find the
on.
depressing part of it? I don't understand.
And
I
it's
thought Fallout of Love was depressing, and I didn't know about this one.
no, I sprung this one on you.
You did. I'm a
But
little sad now.
but it's such a great story. Like it's sparse in the lyrics. He's not filling in all the pieces, but again, even that like very classic, almost cliche look, which you don't hear so much anymore, but dragging a suitcase by a piece of rope. So obviously this is a little kid who can't even carry a suitcase,
Yeah.
who just got left behind, presumably to hang out with his uncle for a while, who is not doing all that great himself, as evidenced by the opening set of lyrics. So
Yeah, that's the thing about Richmond Fontaine is I really do like their lyrics,
yeah,
or his lyrics, I suppose. And I've never been a giant fan of them musically. But I have to admit, I don't know if you've put that on a playlist. And I don't think I've heard it. So and you didn't let me know ahead of time. So I'm going to have to listen to it after the fact. But I'm going to check it out because it sure sounds like a hell of a story, if nothing else.
yeah, and I would give it a 5 out of 5 because as
Okay.
depressing as it is, it's a very nicely drawn story, and it's very fitting with their style. And so I didn't want to tell you about it because I didn't want you to hear I didn't want to hear you say that it drones on like all the other stuff.
Well, and I can't say that because I haven't heard it. So you're absolutely right.
Exactly.
And I will say, you're pretty stingy giving out egg burritos with sour cream. So if you say 5 out of 5, then I'm certainly going to at least listen to it, see what I think.
Yeah, give it a listen. So what's your recommendation for now?
And before I do it, because this time around I actually forgot. I don't think I gave a recommendation or a rating for The Color of Money, and I would say that movie is a 4 out of 5. Egg burritos with sour cream. It's I think a must see. My recommendation for now is one of my favorite comedies of the last 5 years or so. It's up there with We're the Millers as one that I think kind of escaped a lot of people's attention. It is called Tag. It came out in 2018, and it is a film directed by Jeff Tomsic. It's got a great cast. It's Jake Johnson, who I actually was talking about in our last episode, I think, about how funny I think he is. He plays a supporting role. Ed Helms is in it. Jeremy Renner is in it. It's apparently based on a true story about a group of friends who've been friends since grade school age, who have a long running or had a long running game of tag. And they played tag all the time when they were kids. And then when they all went their own ways and went to college and into adulthood, they basically would set aside a month every year where someone was it and they would try to tag each other. And they didn't live in the same part of the country even. So and again, apparently a lot of this is based on the true story. Like guys would dress in costume or disguise so they could get close to somebody and then touch them and tell them they were tagged. And the goal was to get through that month and not end up being the guy who was it, because then you'd have to wait a whole year. You'd be it for a whole year before you would do it again. And it is so funny, and it's a really touching story about this friendship that has lasted for all these years, and they've all gone different ways. Jake Johnson's character plays kind of a stoned loser type. It is really, really a funny movie. Jeremy Renner plays the guy who has never been it since
Hmm.
they were like 12 years old. So the whole goal is that he's getting married, and the most of the movie revolves around him avoiding getting tagged and them plotting together to try to get him it before he gets married, or at least while they're there for this wedding for the weekend. And it's just really a great movie. It's so funny. There's early on, they just show a bunch of scenes of how they've tagged people in the past. And there's a great one where I don't remember if it's Ed Helms' character whose father died, but they're at a funeral, and maybe it was Jake Johnson's father died, but they're all standing next to each other, and they're all clearly standing, looking down on a casket, and the camera's on the other side of the casket looking at him. And one of the guys, he looks over at the grieving son and says, man, I really think I think your dad would want you to know that you're it. And he tags him and walks away, and everybody runs away from him from there. So it's that kind of humor. It's really a great movie. I recommend it highly. I actually, like I said, I think it's a sleeper. I'm going to give it 5 out of 5 egg burritos, because I just, every time I watch it, and I've watched it with my boys probably 4 or 5 times at this point. Every time I watch it, I laugh my ass off. It's really good.
I don't know that movie. I'm definitely gonna have to check it out. I like Jeremy Renner.
Yeah,
I
he's
like
good
Ed
in it.
Helms.
And like I said, Ed Helms is very funny, and there's some touching scenes with him. Jake Johnson, he's really good at playing kind of that. He's not the brightest guy in the world, and he's a bit of a stoner, but it's really good. And I'm looking it up because I just cannot fail to mention another actor who I love. He's a stand-up comic, who apparently is now like a rapper.
So am I
Like he's
supposed to like throw out names like you did for movies? Bobcat
Yeah,
Goldthwait.
exactly. Hannibal Buress.
Oh yeah, he's funny.
He's so funny in this movie. He's just he's not really acting much. It looks like it's pretty much his personality, because I've seen a bunch of his stand-up, but it fits perfectly in this movie as one of these 5 friends that are always that they've been doing this for years. And the movie itself ends, like the end credits, over the credits is video of the actual guys who've been playing tag for 20, 30 years. And it's, people were catching video of them tagging each other, like at the airport. One was a woman was like, one of the guys dressed up like a nun and then tagged them. And, it's really, really worth seeing.
I will check it out. And the Bobcat Goldthwait reference came from my binging of that 70s show. He actually showed up on one of those episodes.
Is that right? I didn't know.
Yeah.
That. I love Bobcat.
I do too. Alrighty. That takes us to our segment called Post Facto.
It's a mistake. It's a mistake.
Yeah, and so I prepared the outline for this episode, and I put in my little editorial comments, really just to you, but I feel like I need to say it. I had a couple friends point out mistakes from last week's episode, which were basically our stories of us getting drunk and doing stupid stuff. And my editorial was, mistakes and stories about how drunk we were? No way. I'm surprised I got anything right in those stories. So I still stand proudly that I was able to remember the gist of those things. But one non-drinking story, but about a movie that I recommended called Drinking Buddies, or is actually, I'm not even sure I recommended it. I think it was just one of my honorable mentions. But at one point, when I was editing, I listened to it and I listed some of the actors, and one of them was Ron Swanson. Well, Ron Swanson wasn't an actor in that movie, because he's the director of public or Parks and Recs in Pawnee, Indiana, from the TV show Parks and Rec. The actor was Ron Livingston in Drinking Buddies, and he's a great actor. And I wanted to point that out, if maybe that will point people towards the movie a little bit too. But it was definitely not Ron Swanson. And then the big mistake, or at least the multiple, I got text after text on this one. I think I was getting texts as they were listening to the podcast. But Andy, my friend Andy, who was in the vehicle that I caused to crash, he was the driver. He wanted to point out that we were on our way to Noggles, which is famous in this podcast, after a semi-formal. It wasn't us beforehand. So we didn't, I guess, pre-party at somebody's apartment, although chances are we did that anyway. And then maybe the biggest and probably the funniest part is, in the episode last time, I mentioned I didn't really remember how we cleared the scene. Well, that's because Andy basically ordered me to leave before the cops showed up. And I think he was so worried that I was just going to ruin everything, and that he was never going to get out of like a ticket or anything if I was around. So they literally ordered me out of the car. And the date that I went with, we walked through campus and away from the car before any emergency vehicles showed up. So I completely spaced on that. I do remember it now, but I needed Andy's help to correct that.
So I don't know that I had any, but it doesn't mean that I didn't have moments where I'm stumbling around trying to remember the name of a movie, and Tom's able to shout out like 3 or 4 before I can come up with it. So that'll probably go on our next post factum. All right. This brings us to the last segment for this episode, and it's a recurring one. Each of us will choose a song to add to a playlist. And we put those playlists up on Spotify, Apple Podcast, Apple Music, Amazon Music, and YouTube Music as best we can, so folks can check them out. We'd previously played them on the episode, but for a variety of reasons, we decided to move away from that. One of our episodes, we're probably going to go through what our rules are for creating a playlist. One is not to repeat artists, and I already broke that one. So, but note that was not for the playlist. That was for a recommendation.
Yeah, I think you're safe, man. I think we can recommend whatever we want, whether it's been repeated or it's an artist we've used before. The rules for the actual playlist are sacrosanct. We can't. We haven't messed with those for 40 years, so I don't want to start now.
So I'll be choosing a Richmond Fontaine song for my recommendations for everything for the rest of this podcast. So
yeah, we may have to modify it for those purposes somewhere down the line. Somewhere we ought to be able to go back to an artist.
All right. Tom, why don't you go ahead and go with your choice for the playlist? I know this song and I love it.
Yes. So my recommendation, or not recommendation, my selection for our season 2 playlist this week is Choctaw Bingo by James McMurtry. It's from an album called St. Mary of the Woods. Although he also performed it, he's got 1 or 2 live albums, and he always performs it live. But St. Mary of the Woods, I think, was the first time it came out recorded. That was in 2002. It is a really long song. I think it's like a 6-minute song. And it's not really about games. It's just the title says bingo, so that's what drew me to it. And there's a reference to Choctaw Bingo throughout it in the refrain of the song. It is just a great description of life in Oklahoma and Texas, at least back in the 90s or 2000s. It's just a long description of all these crazy people in this family, this fictional family, who are all going to Oklahoma to visit their uncle. And it just, like I said, it goes on forever. I'm not usually a big fan of long songs. After American Pie, I'd like to keep my songs down to 3 minutes or less. This one's worth listening to from start to finish. It's really funny. Like, he has such a great sense of humor. It's not a surprise that he's a great songwriter. He's actually Larry McMurtry's son, the great novelist Larry McMurtry. But James McMurtry himself is probably in his 60s now, and I think he's been performing music for 30 or 40 years, and he's kind of an Americana star, even if I think the general public doesn't know who he is. But my recommendation is for Choctaw Bingo by James McMurtry.
Great choice. Like I said, it's a good story song. Really good choice. Alrighty. I shuffled stuff around. I'd had at one point the Turnpike Troubadours is my playlist song, but I went with a band that I wish more people listened to. The name of the band is the Roadside Graves. I think I may have talked about them in a previous episode when we were talking about Rumblefish. Their latest album is drew inspiration from Rumblefish. But I went with a little bit older song. It's from 2001's album, If Shacking Up Is All You Want to Do. The name of the song is Reno, the Sundowner is Closed. And it's, again, tangentially related to games, but it's just a really great song. The references to gaming he's out in Reno. I think his wife has passed away. Here's Chris again with another depressing ass song choice. But his wife has passed. He finds another woman that he's with and is really enjoying their time together, but doesn't want to connect. Like, at one point, a bartender says, do you know who that is you're with? And he's like, no, and I don't think I want to. Basically, but the reference to cards is my favorite part of the song. It's the 2 lead singers. So it's Jeremy Benson, who's the guitarist, and the primary lead singer is a guy named John Gleason. So these guys are not classic rock stars. They are teachers. You know, they all work around Metuchen, I believe. They record when they can. They tour when they're not working. So it's, you know, they just formed their own label because their stuff wasn't being put out on some of these streaming services, and it finally is now. So my favorite is it's like aces backed by eights, stealing from the bottom of the deck. Careful the games you play, you never know what kind of hand you'll get. So it's more of a life lesson, but using imagery of cards. It's another sort of like you talked about how it's all the characters of Oklahoma, and this is more the dark side again of what's, you know, Reno and the seedy motels and the cards and the gambling and all that stuff. But it's in the end, it's a pretty uplifting song. It just definitely has some darker themes, which you've probably heard me say a lot. So check it out.
It's uplifting for a Derrickson recommendation.
I'm trying to get all these out because I know in a future episode we're going to be challenged to only uplifting, upbeat stuff. I gotta get going on that.
Yeah, you're gonna have to stretch out before that one.
I know.
And that's coming soon, as a matter of fact.
So
let me point out, and you did mention it, but so those two songs will go on our playlist. We started out with a Spotify playlist. We now have playlists on other services, but we'll try to make them. We'll make them public as soon as we can, so everybody can access the playlist itself. I found recently that, in fact, a person I know has listened to the playlist more than they've listened to episodes of the podcast. Actually, she's listened to a couple episodes, but she says she loves the playlist. So that's good feedback, right? I'm happy to hear that. And the other thing that we can now say is that we are on other platforms for the podcast itself. Again, we were on Spotify. We've made some changes so that we can now be on Apple Podcast. We're on Amazon Music. We are on another one, maybe?
Trying to get onto YouTube. We'll get there.
Gotcha. We're working on YouTube, but we're definitely on 3 different places. And what we would ask folks to do is, first of all, follow us on whatever you listen to podcasts on. Please rate us, give us a high rating if you're comfortable doing that. Share it, do whatever you can to get other people to listen, because we really enjoy doing it and we would like to continue to do it. Also, please comment. I know on Spotify podcasts, you can make comments that we can see from our end. And if you've got any suggestions for themes or other things that you think we can or should do with the podcast, we'd love to hear about them. We will have an email address soon, and I'll let you speak to other developments.
Yeah, the website's in a draft form. I briefly published it. My goal is to have it done by the end of this week. So we should have it out before or when episode 3 comes out. So
right,
we're getting there.
In advance, right? So it's going to be, the URL is thirdsongpodcast.com, correct?
Yep, thirdsonginpodcast.com.
Yeah, what did I say? Third Song Podcast. Well, I just changed the title of the whole show. Thirdsonginpodcast.com. And once we're up and running, hopefully we'll have links to our playlists in different formats and different platforms. And also we'll provide lists of the things we recommend, or links to the things we recommend. Hopefully we'll also be able to provide links to websites and social media for guests that we may have on the podcast, where we have big plans to try to get some people on here and hopefully mix things up a little bit. But otherwise, we're very happy you're listening to us. Thank you very much. And
this has been Third Song In with Chris and Tom. Thanks for joining us.
Let's record something really interesting.
Oh, you wanted to do something interesting?
You weren't ready for that, were you?